thank everyone for your leadership, because you all are giving people a sense of confidence while you are trying to bring limited resources to what needs to be addressed in this growing threat of these wildfires. And the bottom line is that, as the president has said, his bipartisan framework for infrastructure is going to address a lot of these challenges, but there is other work to be done. And so I look forward to staying in touch with all of you. And again, thank you for your leadership.
Well, thank you. Governor Brown, if you'd be willing, you could give us an overview of what the challenges are you Western governors are facing, and what you think we should be doing and can do to help. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. President and Madam Vice President, for having us here for this incredibly important conversation. As you well know, we Western governors, our states are truly on the front lines when it comes to drought, fires, and our rapidly changing climate. We were talking earlier before you got on. Just this weekend, my state of Oregon experienced 3 consecutive days of record-breaking high temperatures across the Willamette Valley, reaching upwards of 117 degrees. It is unprecedented. And unfortunately, it follows one of the most devastating wildfire seasons in our state's history. Last year, we had more than 2,000 fires that burned over 1 million acres. Entire communities were literally wiped off the map in minutes. We lost 9 lives, more than 4,000 homes, and nearly 2,000 other structures. As you well know, the impact on our communities and our local economies will last for years to come. Oregonians have been through a lot in the last 18 months. We've had 4 federal disaster declarations in my state since April of 2020. But what last year's fire season underscored is that most often those who can least afford the impacts are hurt the most. Our communities of color, our rural and low-income communities were disproportionately impacted. Our disaster preparedness and recovery services must be available to everyone, regardless of the language they speak, the color of their skin, their economic situation, whether they own a home or not, or their immigration status. Everyone impacted by a disaster should be eligible for FEMA assistance, including our undocumented families. It's absolutely the right thing to do. Our local communities are increasingly challenged to respond on their own to the disasters of the scales we are seeing. We've been preparing for this year's fire season by investing millions of dollars, shoring up additional resources and staffing at our Office of Emergency Management, so they then can support our local and our tribal partners. However, Mr. President, Madam Vice President, we still have a number of concerns. It includes whether there will be available wildfire and non-fire federal resources. We know as we're entering this wildfire season, our eastern counterparts are preparing for a very difficult hurricane season. And so we may not be able to rely on other regions to help out this year. And with that in mind, I do want to say thank you for approving our cost share adjustment related to our 2020 Labor Day wildfires at 100% for Oregon, treating this the same as COVID-19 and the same as what happened in Louisiana for their hurricane recovery efforts. I would also ask that federal individual assistance be approved for disaster mitigation activities for wildfire, just as FEMA recently approved for hurricanes. And then finally, and I just have to say gratefully, our Good Neighbor Authority, we have partnered with the federal government over the years to reduce wildfire risk on federal lands through collaborative processes, including prescribed burns, removing dead trees, and underbrush. With the recent passage of our state legislation, we have an opportunity to fund even more of these Good Neighbor Authority projects together. It's a win-win-win. It creates jobs, creates healthy landscapes, and reduces wildfire risk. And we have the dollars to invest now. So we look forward to partnering with you, and we are incredibly grateful, Mr. President, for your leadership. Back over to you.
Well, Madam Governor, I'm not being solicitous when I say we're grateful for your leadership. I really mean it. And one of the things that I'd like to ask before we move on is what would you be looking for us to do at the federal level to strengthen this agreement to build off the lessons that, the Good Neighbor Agreement? And is there anything in particular that you've learned from last season that would add to the needs of this season?
Well, you mentioned it in your remarks, Mr. President, making sure we have resources to train our National Guardsmen and women prior to fire season has been extremely helpful the last 2 fire seasons. This should be universal practice nationwide. It's incredibly helpful. We have relied on our National Guard every step of the way throughout the pandemic, and we certainly rely on them in support activities in firefighting. The other piece, and I see Chief Christensen there in terms of the Good Neighbor Authority. This has been extraordinary in our ability to put people back to work in our timber-dependent rural communities, in our ability to create healthy landscapes, and our ability to provide timber for the mills, and frankly, our ability to reduce wildfire risk. And so more resources to collaborate and provide what you describe as comprehensive collective efforts to reduce wildfire risk would be extremely helpful.
Well, we ought to get, not in this moment, but we ought to get, no pun intended, deeply in the weeds as to specifically what can be done. And I'd ask my appropriate cabinet members to be working with your people as to what we can do along those lines, because it seems to be self-evident that that makes a lot of sense. But we have a lot of other things to cover here, but I look to Dr. Sherwood. Are we moving?
I'm going to move shortly. If you want to ask any further questions of governors, or we can move with the press departing and we'll continue our discussion.
Let me ask the Vice President if she has any questions, and or any cabinet member if they have any questions for the governor.
What I'm interested in, it's really a follow-up to what the President asked. With each consecutive wildfire season, and they are growing in terms of the enormity, what are we learning, and how can the federal government address the challenges and the gaps that you have seen with each fire season in terms of the resources, but also the approach? And, for example, including the public education piece, including the piece that is about encouraging the private sector, where appropriate, to be engaged around resilience and adaptation. On the issue of water policy, what kind of resources do you need that are also preventative as well as reactive to the wildfires themselves?
Governor Newsom, do you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, no. Well, first, if I just may, a little indulgence, and thank you, Madam Governor and Madam Vice President. Mr. President, I've been waiting almost 4.5 years to hear a president say what you just said. It's profoundly important, every word you spoke, and I mean it. It goes without saying, in California, we were engaged in a relationship with the federal government vis-a-vis the Vice President's question. It was more like sparring partners, not working partners. So we have an opportunity here to turn the page on the finger pointing and the rhetoric. We were debating raking policies, literally debating raking policies in this country in the last few years. But our eyes are wide open. By the way, I'm here in your forest, our forest, federal forest in Klamath and Siskiyou County, 2 of the largest wildfires that we've had year to date in this region. We were up here yesterday. Thank you, Mr. President. I didn't have to make a call to you to get the FMAG approved yesterday up here in Siskiyou County for the largest of the wildfires, the lava fire, which is a few miles away from me. But look, the hots are getting hotter. The dries are getting drier. The smash mouth realities of climate change are here, and they're here decades ahead of when we had anticipated. So across the board, we have to disabuse ourselves of the old timelines and the old frames of engagement The seriousness of this cannot be underscored. We had last year a heat dome over the west coast of the United States, not dissimilar to the one we're experiencing north of where I am, and Governor Brown and Inslee have experienced most acutely. But that led to 12,000 lightning strikes in 24 hours and 5 of the most destructive wildfires, 5 of the 6 largest in our history, concurrently in last year's wildfire season. We were burning up. We were choking up. We haven't just heated up. And I should just say this, with due respect to those that don't believe in science, you got to believe your own damn eyes, observed evidence. You know, when you look at that thermometer, 117, 119 degrees up north, we were 123 down in Palm Springs 2 days ago, 111 just 48 hours ago. There's no Republican thermometer, no Democratic thermometer. These realities are here with us today. So, Madam Vice President, across the board, we can't just double down. That's old, stale rhetoric. We have to have a sense of intentionality and responsibility to radically change our vegetation forest management policies, our suppression policies, our pre-positioning policies, the strategies we're engaging the president just laid out on technology,